Donald Trump was elected president last week, that despite facing a number of ongoing state and federal criminal charges. What happens to those cases now that Trump is president-elect, and what is likely to happen once Trump takes office? Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, a partner at Dentons. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
Got a lot to talk about here. What does this mean? What does this mean for, we can go through the cases one by one here, but in general, what does this mean?
Briefly, Ted, what it means that as for the state cases, and there are two of them, they're absolutely going to have to be delayed. And as for the federal cases, I think we can say with a high degree of certainty, they're going to be dismissed.
And for the federal cases, Trump has said he plans to fire the special prosecutor. I think he said he can do it in 2 seconds. He's going to do it in 2 seconds. Is the prosecutor even going to wait?
He's not, and for different reasons. So what Jack Smith, the special prosecutor for the Department of Justice, has said is that there is a Department of Justice policy, and it is, in my mind, a good policy that says we ought not to criminally prosecute sitting presidents. And there's good reason for that. A president is supposed to be looking out for our interests overseas in a very dangerous world, looking out for our interests domestically as well. And if that president is instead required to sit in a courtroom every single day, concerned about his liberty interest perhaps being taken away at some point in time, we lose the ability to have a president who's focused on international and domestic issues. So that's true for any president. It's been true all the way back to Nixon. It was true during the Clinton administration. And so Jack Smith has said, I need to go back and I need some time. He told the court in Washington, D.C., I need some time to figure out exactly how it is we are going to essentially wind down these prosecutions because of this long-standing Department of Justice policy. And Ted, that is very much what's happening both in Manhattan now, where the prosecutors there have said there's a sentencing coming up on November 27. We need some time to determine whether or not that should go forward. And they're trying to envision what it would be to have a president at risk of being incarcerated while he is president of the United States. The prosecutors have asked for time to kind of think this over. And the defense lawyers, of course, for Mr. Trump were very willing to have that occur as well. And then we have the Georgia case, which is on hold for completely different reasons. But I expect that these issues are going to become very much a part of that prosecution as well.
I want to go to each of those cases in a second here, but delay, that worked to Trump's advantage, didn't it?
It works in every single criminal case, as we've talked about before, Ted. But in this case, the extraordinary nature of this case, not just that a president is charged, not just that a president is investigated for crimes, but that a former president once again becomes a president and has all of these powers available to him, including pardon, hiring and firing of the Attorney General, wants to put the Attorney General in place right away without even waiting for Senate confirmation. So we've never faced anything like this in our nation's history. So this delay idea, which works in every criminal case, is all the more successful here for President Trump.
Let's go to the New York case here. Convicted 34 some odd counts of falsifying business records. As you mentioned, his attorneys want the sentencing canceled because he will be president of the United States. And again, where does the Supreme Court's ruling on protection for presidents, exemptions and such, does that fit into this case, or is that kind of like an umbrella that looks over the entire proceedings?
It's interesting because that case, the case of the U.S. Supreme Court, that case that granted the executive, the President of the United States, broad immunity, sounds very simple in its concept. If it's a core issue, say granting pardons, a President of the United States is immune from any prosecution in the course of that act. If it's a private act, so for example, if it was a president who was dealing in his own personal businesses, that might not be. But there are so many intersections between private life and what is a core function of the President of the United States that it's not easy, oftentimes, to determine when is it a president should be immune from prosecution and when ought he not to be immune. And so the courts at the state level and the federal level are wrestling with that very issue.
Even if it's a state crime?
Correct. Even if it's a state crime, because what happens is, for example, in Georgia, President Trump will argue and has argued, listen, when I was making these phone calls to the Secretary of State in Georgia, that was part of my responsibility as a president of the United States. And so the Supremacy Clause, the U.S. Constitution protects me in the course of acting in that core role, he argued, as president of the United States. Others would say, no, that wasn't a core role. You were a candidate, not the president. And so, again, not a clear answer, at least so far as the courts have been able to determine yet.
What if in the New York case, because this is the one where he's been convicted, he is a convicted felon here. What if the judge says, I'm sorry, you're a convicted felon, I'm sentencing you to however months in prison? What happens?
So the most reasonable option after that decision, if we come to that decision, and it's not clear that we will, but if we come to that decision, is for the judge to then say, but I'm going to delay imposition of that sentence until such time as you leave office. So 4 years from now, it may be that you would face a term of incarceration, again, if that's the sentence that the judge imposes, and if we even arrive at a sentencing, because none of that is clear now.
Yeah, boy, you talk about not wanting to leave office. You'll never get him out of there if that's the case.
Well, and clearly it had to be, as a very human desire, a reason for wanting to become president of the United States, because you are afforded all of these extraordinary protections that you and I wouldn't otherwise be granted.
In the D.C. and Florida case, in D.C., charged with attempting, scheming to overturn the vote. The Florida case, which I find personally I don't understand how anyone doesn't have a problem with this, taking top secret documents out of the White House and having them around your house. These cases, as you mentioned, they are winding down. He's not going to be prosecuted for that, is he?
He's not going to be, for two reasons. As we just discussed, Jack Smith himself is going to employ this policy at the Department of Justice that says we ought not to be prosecuting a sitting president. And on January 20th, this defendant is going to be the sitting president of the United States. And so Jack Smith, correctly, I think, has said, Department of Justice policy says we can't go forward.
Yeah.
But perhaps more conclusively, President Trump is going to fire any prosecutor who would go forward with any of these prosecutions, remove Jack Smith most certainly if he hasn't already stepped down, tell his attorney general to stop this prosecution. And remember, distinct from the case in Washington, D.C., Ted, there are two defendants in the Florida documents case, in the classified documents case in Florida, who wouldn't otherwise be afforded the kind of immunity that a president might be afforded. But the president can say, with the new powers he will have on January 20th, I pardoned those two individuals. So that case is going to go away. The Washington, D.C. case certainly is going to go away. We don't know as to the state cases whether there's going to be delay or termination for those cases.
Okay, let's say that for whatever reason, even in a Republican-dominated Congress, Donald Trump is impeached, he's convicted, he's removed from office, he's back among the normal crowd. Do these investigations pick up? Can they be started again? Is that double jeopardy? How does that work?
So double jeopardy hasn't attached in any of these cases because double jeopardy doesn't attach until a jury is sworn in. So double jeopardy is not going to be there. What is another problem, though, that lawyers are going to have to pay close attention to is the statute of limitations. Remember, Ted, these are events that took place in 2016 by and large. Here we are in 2024. Some number of years later, the statute of limitations may cause a significant hurdle for any prosecutor considering rejuvenating or bringing these prosecutions back to life.
But they can come back to life. They don't just end because the prosecution decides we can't pursue them because he's now a president.
We don't know, because here's what's going to happen. There are two ways you can dismiss a case, as you probably know. One is dismiss a case without prejudice, which is to say we have the opportunity to come back in the scenario you're talking about and bring these cases again. Or a judge may say, I'm going to agree with you, we should dismiss the case. And at the end of the day, it is the judge's decision. But the judge may say it's going to be dismissed with prejudice, which is to say you will be barred from bringing these charges again.
And can he, in office, just basically stand up in front of a microphone and just say, I grant myself a pardon from all of these, any past and future prosecutions?
That's a question that constitutional scholars are wrestling with and have been wrestling with as it relates to former president and soon to be president again, Trump. But what is certain is he has other vehicles available to him, including what we just talked about, which is putting an attorney general in office who will follow the dictates of his desires and making sure that there are no prosecutors moving forward with any of the federal cases that he has in place right now. Now, as you know too, Ted, the federal government, even the President of the United States, doesn't have any authority over the Manhattan District Attorney. He doesn't have any authority over the District Attorney in Georgia. But there is this law now causing problems, which is immunity, number one, and number two, this policy, and again, I think it is a good policy that says we ought not to distract a sitting president by charging him with a crime, by forcing him to be in court every single day.
tangled web. Very tangled. But
Unusual times.
Yeah, Paul Charlton Denton's great explanation. Good stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks
We
for
appreciate
having
it.
me, Ted.